Good afternoon. Well, I like that walk-on music. How many of you know that song? I'm just doing a quick demographic check here. A few of you don't. Help me out here. Men at Work?
Yep.
Men at Work? Yeah. Good song. That glorious song, with all due respect, how did they end up with that song? That's maybe a conversation later. Nonetheless, my name is Vince Crivello. Some of you know me. Some of you may not know me. Let me throw, if you don't mind, just find me a nice water spot there. I head up practice management on the Loring Ward side. And just by a show of hands, just so we get a sense of the audience, because we've got a mix of BAM advisors, a few Buck advisors, presumably, and Loring Ward. How many of you are from the Loring Ward side? Okay, so presumably pretty new to the concept of spend down. How about the BAM side? Okay, so you've seen spend down before. You're seeing a little bit of an evolution this time. How many of you are from Vanguard, or our competitor down the street? So nobody here is kind of get our intellectual property. That's good. That's good. Well, I head up practice management for Loring Ward. Excited to be here. This is technically my first presentation in the merged organization, so give me a little slack as we go through this. It was great meeting many of you at the learning groups yesterday and at Monterey and Austin prior. I'd like to introduce a couple folks now. Jonathan Scheid and Ernest Clark, if you want to just share a little bit about your backgrounds.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Scheid. I'm Vice President of Portfolio Strategy and Education at Loring Ward. I'm a boomerang, so I just came back June of last year to Loring Ward, but I was previously there. I started as an intern working with Dr. Mayor Statman. I was a research assistant for him, and that was back in '97. I was full-time in '98, worked investments and a number of marketing projects up until 2006. I helped start up another TAMP, and then been talking with Alex over the last few years, and he made a great pitch to me, said, you come over here and it'll be nothing but good times and fun. So I signed up, and it's actually wonderful. It's been a lot of good times and a lot of fun, and a lot of that has to do with everybody that's in this room. Just the advisory community is fantastic here, and that was the one thing I really missed being away.
So before I start, I want to really say how much of a pleasure it's been and a privilege to work with you two and all the Loring Ward people. It's been really energizing, and advisors I work with on the Loring Ward side. So my name is Ernest Clark. I got a really boring resume. I spent 32 years in public accounting with the oldest firm in Alabama. In my last 6 years there, we got a relationship as a BAM advisor, and we started up an IRA and grew it really quick. And after 6 years, I'm retired from public accounting. I've been at BAM Advisor Services for the last 13 years, wore a lot of hats, but where I'd like to say I spend most of my time is trying to help advisors be successful in growing their practice. My background is accounting degree, and I'm a CPA, PFS.
And thanks for all the partnership and support in evolving spend down. I'll share with you a quick story. I've had the pleasure of working with Ernest, and we've been working pretty diligently over the last year on spend down amongst other projects. But I think the first time I met Jonathan, we were at competing firms at a conference. And I don't know if you remember this, Jonathan, but I had just had foot surgery, so I was on crutches, and I couldn't even set up my own booth at the conference, and Jonathan was kind enough to help me set that up. So in the spirit of help, this is a guy that was truly helpful, and it's been a joy working with him. So what we'd like to share with you today, many of you are familiar with the concept of spend down. We're going to walk you through some of the basics and then give you a sense of how we're evolving it. But I want you to think of spend down more than just a marketing package, more than just a way of explaining how you do what you do. We're going to introduce some solutions that we're working on and really look to get your insight and feedback on where you'd like to prioritize how we continue to enhance this product or solution, if you will, going forward. With respect to agenda, I'm going to share with you some thoughts on where we think the industry is headed. You saw some of those with Tobias. You heard it from Mike and Alex this morning. We're going to dive deep into spend down, but we're also going to touch on how you can use MoneyGuide Pro in the process, which we're excited about that rollout on the BAM side. So let's talk about the wealth management industry, and Tobias touched on this morning, but you think about the new value model. You heard it also from David Booth and Alex talking a little bit about where this industry has evolved. If you think about Starbucks real briefly, you think about what's the underlying thing that Starbucks sells. Beyond coffee, it's the beans, right? The commodities. When they take those beans and they grind them and roast them into coffee, that's the good. The service is the barista that makes that customized cup of coffee. The experience is when you go into a branch or you use that app to order ahead of time. But ultimately, transformations. Any ideas on what kind of transformations might happen at a Starbucks or by visiting a Starbucks? Well, when you're buying that cup of coffee from that barista, you're getting beans sourced from certain farmers. And I don't know if you've seen some of their campaigns, but they're really trying to help some of those farmers, whether they be in Costa Rica or elsewhere. Moreover, every time you buy that cup of coffee, you may be sending somebody or helping send somebody to college. They got that partnership with ASU Arizona State. So really, Starbucks is focused not just on the beans, not just on the coffee, not just on the service or the experience, but really delivering transformational experiences. So how does that relate to the wealth management model? Well, what we've done is we've co-opted Fidelity's work, which is based in part on Bain and Company's work, and we think about the pyramid in 4 different layers. You got the money at the bottom, the goals, life, and transformations. Now, we've evolved what Fidelity has shown, and I'm going to go through this very quickly. In my breakout tomorrow, we're going to spend a little bit more time here. But at the bottom of the pyramid, you have the fundamentals of what we do, from portfolio design, asset structure, thinking about cash flow, either pre-retirement, things like budgeting, or post-retirement income. You've got some tax management and data optimization. As you move up the pyramid, you start to figure out what does a client need in terms of goals. Now, this might be college planning, obviously retirement, but other elements. It may be estate or charitable causes. But what we think the real value that you bring in is really at the top of the pyramid as you start to help your clients balance work and life, or think about values and what's important to them. Not just giving to a charity, but why are they giving? Not just contributing to a 529, but what kind of values are they looking to instill for their family? And ultimately, helping them deliver on the promise of transformations. Maybe not just to their family, but to their community, or making an impact elsewhere in the world. So this pyramid is a framework in which you're going to be seeing more of. A lot of our content, a lot of our editorial elements are going to be organized around this, and if it's something that you might find helpful to use with your clients, certainly we're going to have iterations of this to use as well. Now let's talk a little bit about spend down. Now, if you think about the pyramid as what you do, the question is how do you do it? How do you articulate that process? So when we started working with the BAM side, we were excited because we saw this map that looked somewhat like this. And this map was fantastic. We saw it, we're like, that is exactly what we need for our advisors to articulate how they help clients across their life. But then as we started digging into this, we thought, well, what if we were to just change it here or there? And then we started talking to a lot of the folks internally. And Ernest, you can, I think you shared a story yesterday around the genesis of this. So for the Loring Ward folks, would you mind just sharing how this came to be?
I think before we talk about where we go, why don't we pull back and talk about how this started, because I think it's really easy to understand that way. So I went through a period of time that, like every Friday afternoon, I was thinking about cases I had worked with other advisors, where I had phone calls with where the client, what's the facts of the case of that prospect, and then going through it with the advisor, here's the value proposition that you should go and pitch to the prospect to close the case. So I was helping them close the case. It was like every Friday I'd think about a case I had the week, and I said, that case was like a case I had 4 weeks ago. I did that every week for about 6 to 8 weeks, and then after I started thinking, now it's a different case. We're after eight weeks, I realized they're all the same case. It's like, the only difference is we go in and we have no idea what the prospect is on this timeline. So can we build a tool that lays out the timeline, and the advisor goes and knowing nothing about a prospect and finds out where they're at in the timeline, and then pitch your value proposition. It's really advanced planning propositions of values that you can do going forward. So basically, I pulled some paper out of the garbage can and wrote on the back of it, and I was fortunate enough to be working with Ben Lanning. I think Ben's in the room. Maybe he is.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, so I was working with Ben, and Ben was a person that actually took my garbage can notes and laid it out in organized fashion. And we wrote it out, I think, 2 years ago at the BAM conference. And when we wrote it out, we did it in 2 sessions. One, we talked about, we called it Tax Alpha, which is really digging down to each one of these tactics. And then the next session we did was an overall introduction of the spend down experience map. And those videotapes are still on the website if you would like to visit them. I'm sure Allison can help you find them. But anyway, at a high level, the whole concept was you go in and you know nothing about the prospect. And there's really 4 timelines. There's this accumulation period that starts when they get the first paycheck. It ends when they lose their paycheck. Then they go in this period of time that they're retired, but they're not yet forced to take RMDs, which is currently 70.5. Then they start this period of time at 70.5 that they're forced to take money out of their tax-deferred accounts, which we call the spend down, and then legacy. And then we said at the top of the chart, what's the goal of each period, right? Accumulation, save as much as you can, as early as you can to make smart decisions. Blackout, the goal was to move from a goal of paying the least amount of taxes in 1 year to lose the least amount of wealth to taxes over your lifetime. And spend down is a way in which you can fund your lifestyle and incur the least amount of income taxes. And of course, legacy, in the end, no matter how much wealth you accumulate, you only can do 4 things, right? You can spend it, transfer it to heirs, charity, or if you don't do really good planning, you're going to leak it out to the government income and estate taxes. So that's the concept of the whole timeline. I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Do you still have that napkin? That might be worth something someday.
I think I've long since threw it away. I will tell you what was exciting to me is a year later, which was last year,
Yeah.
we also did a follow-up session, and it was about success stories where advisors had success in the field, came and shared their stories of how they walked in and know nothing about the prospect. And by having this concept kind of in their mind, they could give that voice. You know, this is really, when you look at the original spend down experience map, these tactics, this tool was prepared to be an advisor tool. It wasn't really prepared to be a client-facing document. And it was to give you the voice to use. You know, you get hired by what they hear you say, or voice. So that was the whole concept behind it.
And so what we did is we took this concept, and like any good concept, anyone remember this old screen? It's a little pixelated up on the big one, but anyone remember this? Windows 95? How many of you were, well, most of you, I hope, were alive in 95. I know, yeah. But remember Windows 95? I mean, that was a huge deal back in the day. Microsoft stole the idea from Apple, and Apple stole the idea from Xerox, so Xerox PARC. But when you get a good framework like you saw on Spend Down, what happens is that if you fast forward to Windows 10, which is today's version, it's very familiar, very similar. You've got a great foundation. So based on that foundation, we've evolved Spend Down in many different ways. So if you look at the original, lots of good stuff on here, maybe a little too much for one screen, especially when you have eyes like my 51-year-old eyes. And we got lots of input, not only in terms of use cases, but ideas. And what we did is we evolved it to what you see in this screen. And incidentally, you will have versions of this that are ready and downloadable in your app. And we're going to have some paper versions just to kind of give you a sense of some of the detail available on your way out. So we're calling it, this is a placeholder name, implementation strategy, but really it falls under a broader concept called design, build, and protect. And a design, build, and protect is really a way for you to articulate your value proposition and everything that you do for your client. This implementation strategy is the how. So how do you do it? So the first thing we did, if you look at some of the elements here, is we looked at the name. So as much as a name like Spend Down is easy to say, it may have some negative connotations. So under John Avila's direction in the marketing group, as part of the broader rebrand, we're looking at some catchier names, if you will. So more to follow there. But for the purposes of this conversation, we'll call it Spend Down 2.0 or implementation strategy. The second, we looked at design, the overall design. So how do we take the key elements and put it into a structure that is more intuitive? We looked at some of the names, as well as the categories, as well as the phases. So the old phases included words like blackout, and as I jokingly mentioned yesterday, I have 3 kids in college. Blackout's not necessarily a great term for someone like me. I don't know how your clients might think of blacking out right before they actually retire. It was a great technical phrase, but we wanted to make it more consumer-friendly, like Ernest was talking about. So we've got 4 phases: accumulation, transition, distribution, and legacy. And incidentally, if you think about those 4 phases, those are 4 client segments. Those are 4 areas in which you could design a particular offer and pricing for 4 different client types. So again, this is a very extensible framework. Incidentally, I don't know how many of you attended the benchmarking study, but we see the top quartile firms are very thoughtful about their ideal client and have designed offerings and pricing structures specifically for those. So we've got the 4 phases. You can see the enhanced design. We also looked at the categories, and we wanted to really make the categories more intuitive in terms of the words and naming, and we introduced an area called life and health. We know through our research, both on the investor survey side, as well as looking at secondary resources, that health is a key concern for clients. So we wanted to add that category. We also wanted to provide some relative weighting across the different areas, because we know that in certain phases, for example, life and health may be a larger part of the analysis that you bring, as well as the insight you bring to helping them out. So with that, we looked at lots of different components, and then finally we decided this is something that could live online, it can live in paper format, and it could live as like a poster in your office. So we're very thoughtful about all these elements, and we have a clickable PDF, like I say, that you can download and check out. So let's dive deeper into the 4 phases, and I'm going to have Ernest and Jonathan help me explain different elements of Spend Down and how you can implement those with MoneyGuide Pro. So first, on the accumulation side, we're going to touch on a couple areas: 360 discovery, as well as portfolio design. About 7-8 years ago, we were doing a lot of work with CEG, and we thought there's got to be a simpler way to have that life discovery conversation. So we introduced 360 Discovery. For those of you on the Loring Ward side, you're very familiar with this program. It's now in version 2. On the BAM side, we're excited to bring this out to you, and this is an area that Tim Maurer and I will be working very closely together over the next 3 to 4 months to significantly enhance. Another concept that we had was the 360 Life Map. We show it here in the family profile structure. We're going to be evolving that as well, and we're looking at various partners to help us implement that digitally. The final component to this is we know one of the top 3 challenges from our benchmarking study is systematizing workflows. So we're very thoughtful of how this life and discovery conversation will seamlessly integrate into that financial planning conversation, and specifically MoneyGuide Pro. We included a screen here of expectations and concerns. So we're trying to tie all these pieces together from prospect all the way through tenured client. So once you've had that discovery conversation, how do you go in and start to build a portfolio aligned with their needs? And how do you do that in a way that differentiates you in the market? With that, I'm going to have Jonathan share some thoughts on that front.
Great. Thank you, Vince. Yeah, so adding on to that, we didn't want to just put out this great process for you to go and present off of and share with your clients without giving you resources and strategies for every one of those items along the way. So that's some of the concepts that we wanted to talk about. And the one I'm going to talk about is an item in that accumulation phase that says to assume the proper asset placement. And so at Loring Ward, we currently have, and this is available also through BAM 3.0 and some other services, we have an asset location idea, right? And the idea of asset location is that there are specific asset classes that should be in specific accounts, right? So we know that there's qualified and there's non-qualified accounts. And so what we have here is an example of one of our model portfolios that advisors will use. We give you a hypothetical case where you have $1 million client and 300,000 of that million is in a qualified account. But a traditional allocation here, what you might do is just allocate straight across, so the full allocation goes into taxable and the full allocation goes into the qualified. But that might not be the most efficient from a tax standpoint. So are there ways that we can improve this and actually automate it? And actually that's something that we've done for our advisors. Is we put together a process that helps evaluate this and what asset should go into which account. And so that process looks very complicated on this screen, but what we've done is decompose our capital market assumptions, right? So we put together capital market assumptions for 33 different asset classes. We publish those every year. They're available through our website, and if you don't have access to our website, just ask your relationship manager, and they should be able to provide that to you. And then when we look at each of those expected returns, we broke them down between interest, dividend, realized capital gain, because we have a history with the funds that we're using to get an idea of what the annual capital gain distributions look like, and then unrealized capital gain, what kind of growth is left over. We look at the tax treatment of those, and then apply some tax rates to figure out what a tax cost is. The long story short is we try to put this into a numerical format called our ALPS scoring, asset location preference scores. And so what this does is it'll rank it from the most tax efficient, which we here list as munis, to the least tax efficient, which are high yield U.S. government bonds, or high yield U.S. bonds. And then you go and you take this information and you start to fill. You can actually, you can reorder your allocation based on that ALP score. Forgive me. You can reorder it based on that score, and then in this example, we're going to fill our qualified account from the bottom up. So the most inefficient is that real estate asset class, and so we start to put that in. In this example, it's followed by international value, and then the one-year fixed income. And so the nice thing is, there's a marketing point that we're talking about ensuring the proper asset location. And then here is a corresponding service that helps you with that implementation. And if you're not using the service, right, maybe you're doing the trading on your own, we would encourage you to look at the list, all the rankings, right? So that's another resource that you would have available for you to go and make some of these decisions versus making those on your own.
Yeah, so I just want to make some comments in working in the field, helping advisors that have prospects in the accumulation phase. The two big issues I'd like for you to take away if you're working a prospect in this phase is, number one, a lot of prospects and even clients aren't really taking advantage of that last 5 years of their high tax brackets pre-retirement before they stop working and go to taxable income in the transitional period without an earned income, a W-2. And I think some of that is communication. For some reason, prospects tell us they're 5 years out, and all of a sudden they're only 1 year out. So hopefully, when we pull all these tools together and move them from being an advisor training tool to more of a client-facing tool, clients and prospects will understand how important it is to clearly communicate that timeline, because there's a lot of advantages we can do by shifting income out of these high tax brackets years into lower tax brackets, either deferring income or accelerating contributions and donor advised funds. The second thing I want you to be careful of working prospects is I've seen a lot of cases recently where the prospect is what I call they overshot the runway. It's like they have a big bucket of money way beyond what they need to fund their lifestyle they choose to live in. And it's interesting, but besides us professionals, I don't see other professionals telling those prospects that they have more than enough they need. I don't see the attorneys saying that to them, nor the CPAs, and that's our job. So when we're working a prospect that's overshot the runway, we can help them go ahead and fund those legacy goals now while they're alive, which basically leaves more wealth to charities and heirs. So that's something I'd like to work on in the next year. I think we need to take that and maybe more formalize it like we're doing in the spin down. It's like you work a prospect, you're trying to build to financial independence. You might be working a prospect that is already way beyond financial independent, and how do we build them to pre-fund those legacy? So I think that's something we can work on in the future.
Transition. So for the BAM side, formerly known as Blackout, this is a critical period. And in fact, Alex Potts touched on this morning. Think about those 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day. Oftentimes, what are they hearing? That this transition and retirement is what? What's the answer? It's a product, right? It might be a VA with some riders, and that's it. It's a lot more complicated than that. And as you go into the overall implementation strategy, you're going to see lots of elements here at play. And what's important is that you, as the advisor, you're orchestrating and bringing all those elements together and having that conversation about the runway, having that conversation about how much is enough, and having the conversation around values. So a couple things that I'm going to have Ernest touch on is, what are some things that are important during this transition phase around ending deferred income, exploring Roth, as well as a tax bracket strategy? Want to just take a couple of these for the audience?
Sure. I guess on the first line, what's really important for us as advisors is our prospects or clients really don't understand how high their tax brackets will be at age 78 or post 78, because no one's done the math. You know, what does that tax deferred compounding look like, and what does the required RMDs look like? It's just, you know, they've been told forever they're going to be in lower brackets when they retire. You know, that's a myth, okay? And secondly, they're not considering that that deferral ends when it goes to the heirs. And generally, the heirs are going to be in the high, you know, the generational difference. The heirs will be in the highest earnings capacity, the highest brackets. In every case I work, parents are in Florida and the child's in California. So they're not missed. This second line is huge, and it's missed so much. And as an advisor, it's your job to bring it to the table. They're assuming in these phases that they're going to be in myriad tax brackets forever. And when you're trying to get them to end a deferral, they're looking at tax brackets, but they need to have an understanding that one will die before the other, and the next calendar year they're going to drop down to single rates for the rest of their lives. They're going to be much higher tax brackets. Just make sure you help the client identify what is deferred assets and have a plan to come to an end. Everybody out there is defer, and no one's saying, how do we get the deferral to end? Generally speaking, you might want to end an annuity contract before an IRA. Every dollar is taxable until you get the gain out, and then you collapse it as a return of principal. But the sooner you end that annuity contract, you know, you collapse the expense being charged in the portfolio for that, the assets in the contract. And then I would generally explore Roth conversions last.
So one of the things that you may have seen earlier is the Power of Money Guide Elite to really help you model these scenarios. And I think what's unique about Money Guide is that they're not only looking at the investment portfolio, they're looking at the broader balance sheet, as well as different elements in terms of saving and spending, longevity, as well as other factors, health factors, for example. So as Ernest said, you know, there's a lot of other things that you can do prior to a Roth conversion, but at the very least, you can use Money Guide Pro to start to explore some of those Roth conversions as part of that broader conversation with clients. And then from a tax bracket strategy, Ernest, you want to just take a couple of these?
Yeah, so it's basically, you've got to start with what the rates look like when they're post 78 in that period of time that they're taking money down. And then you really need to know that that the transition period rates are probably the lowest in their lifetime. I'm telling you, you're starting with a prospect, and they have this myth, I'm going to retire and be in lower tax brackets. You got to explain to them what it looks like in the end, And then you got to explain this transitional period that's going to be the lowest brackets of their lifetime, but it's going to end at 70.5 when OMDs kick out. And so when you're coming up with what's the right solution for that family, and you're talking about emotional, it's really emotional to end a deferral. They're going to cut a check when they don't have to, but they're doing it to lose the least amount of wealth over the lifetime. Generally, the pain points I see families choose is that some families don't want to defer income beyond $170,000 of adjusted gross income because they emotionally don't want to pay the higher Medicare tax. The government gets your tax return, and then you get a surcharge because your income is above 170. Secondly, some families may be okay with paying the additional Medicare tax, but their personal goal might be, I don't want my adjusted gross income to go over 250 because I don't want to incur the net investment income tax. So you might be ending a deferral, but keeping them under $250,000 of adjusted gross income for a married couple. And then the third pain point that I see quite a bit is a family's okay with paying the net investment income tax, but they want to try to end the deferral using a bracket creep of not incurring a 20% capital gains rate. So that family's goal is to keep taxable income under the current amount, which is $489.
And like we've talked about, just like investing, which is a blend of art and science, so is planning. So it's a conversation and really exploring some different scenarios with them. And one of the other things that I just wanted to quickly touch on is this concept of a dimmer switch. These aren't binary decisions. These are oftentimes personal decisions or preference decisions, and it's really a graduated look at how any given decision might impact their broader scenario. In this case, I'm including a screenshot from Money Guide around savings rates. So this is where I would encourage you to give the client the mouse and have them slide and see what happens and see how it impacts their plan to really drive ownership of the plan.
I was just going to add,
Yeah.
when an advisor works the transition phase, it's when you earned your fee. Okay, this is hard stuff. Great advice, and you give it to the client. So expect pushback. I'm just telling you up front, when you end a deferral, expect pushback from the family. Expect it from maybe even their CPA who has this attitude, defer, defer, defer. And my advice is to work with these professionals to start probing them as to how they propose to end the deferral. Okay, and I think that will get you past that push. Show leadership. It's kind of an art, not a science. But it takes a lot of talent. But that's why they pay us the fees that we pay us. We
Absolutely.
tell them what they don't want to hear.
Right, right. So now that we've gone from accumulation in this transition, this incredibly essential stage in which we think there's tremendous opportunity out there. And incidentally, when we say prospects, we also mean clients as well. When was the last time you had a conversation with one of your clients about these different phases and the opportunities to add value? So as you're thinking about some of those upcoming client reviews, this might be a good piece to utilize and describe what you do and how you help not only them, but maybe their kids or their parents as well. So we move from transition into distribution. A couple highlights we wanted to go through here. Wanted to touch on cost basis and rebalancing, Social Security strategies, and as we mentioned before, the importance of having that health conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to talk a little bit about
Thank you.
rebalancing.
All right, actually I'm going to back up one slide here. So one of the things that Ernest mentioned earlier, maybe you caught it, maybe you didn't, but he said that a lot of the points when he was putting them together were there and designed to help you articulate your value to your clients, right? Speak in their language, give them terms that they can understand. Now, some of the messages might be harder to understand, like, okay, what were we actually intending with those? And some of them are a little more straightforward. On the topic of rebalancing, I wanted to highlight two areas here. Actually, I'll walk over here, right? So there's this one here that says sell equities with, wow, you lose focus as you get closer. Sell equities with high basis in up markets, and then the corresponding one is sell fixed income in down markets, right? So how do we normally talk about rebalancing with our clients? Maybe it's a disciplined way of buying low and selling high. Maybe it's to maintain a given level of risk that we established in your investment policy. But here's a way that we can go and talk about it in the distribution phase. And that just makes total common sense, right? So you have a strategy that's totally automated from a rebalance standpoint, right, where you go in and you sell stocks as they go up, and when markets are down, you're selling bonds, right? And so that's the real benefit there, and that's the really huge way of talking about it, because it changes the way they perceive it, and then it adds additional value to a service. And most of the time, we just gloss right over rebalancing, but that's a really key factor that we add in terms of value. I'm not going to cover all these just for the sake of time, but one of the things that we're looking at doing is taking the rebalancing methodology that we've used at Loring Ward and looking at the rebalancing methodology that BAM has used, and then see what the best of both sides are and putting them together. So people on the Loring Ward side are familiar with this matrix here, where we went through, I want to say, 8 years ago or so, and we reallocated some of the bands that we have based on the typical allocation and the type of volatility that we would see from the asset classes. On the BAM side, you're most likely familiar with the 5-25 methodology, which is a combination of absolute and relative. And so I think we ended up actually in similar areas, but we came to it with different methodologies. So now we're going to take this opportunity to combine the best thinking from both sides and give that to you in a nice automated fashion.
And importantly, as we talked about, what we endeavor to do as a firm is help you out with the lower parts of the pyramid so you can focus on the top parts of the pyramid. And the beauty of bringing both of these organizations together is the skills, the competencies, same philosophy, but very complementary. One of the things, too, in terms of Money Guide Elite in particular, that you all will have access to, is being able to model Social Security scenarios. So we've been working with Money Guide Pro for about 10 years. And I can't remember, I don't know if Chip's in the room, but about 4 or 5 years ago, people would actually use a separate Social Security modeling tool because Money Guides wasn't robust enough. Well, the good news is that, without exception, every advisor I've worked with and talked to is now using the analysis within Money Guide. And again, the importance of doing that is not just running scenarios, but understanding how that decision affects the broader balance sheet, affects the broader plan, and the probability of increased positive outcomes. And you can see probability of success there, the second row from the bottom, across these different scenarios. So again, Money Guide will be a key enabler in helping you have some of those conversations and explore those scenarios. But not only on the number side, like I mentioned earlier, on the health side, so really understanding the impact of health and long-term disability and long-term care decisions on your client's long-term success. In fact, we had a presentation earlier on HECMs, aka reverse mortgages, about how utilizing home equity as a liquidity source in situations like this can increase probability of success. And you can run that within Money Guide as well, just to give your clients some options and choices and scenarios. And I just included a couple screenshots here from Money Guide. And of course, they're here, so if you have some specific questions, certainly reach out to them, and then Aaron and Robert are here as well. Let me turn it back to Ernest to talk a little bit about the challenges that advisors face during this phase.
So I wanted to share probably some major challenges I see working in the field with prospects and advisors. And number one is lack of focus of dying with the right assets. Well, I'll just say that and you say, what are you talking about? So if you think of ourselves as advisors working with clients that are in this distribution phase, we're really making the decisions of which assets and what tax buckets we're sending them. And what we've got to be really careful of is, the trick with legacy is no one tells us when that's going to occur. So it could occur for that client tomorrow, right? We don't know when. So we're always prepared for that. So when we're distributing money out, we need to be focused on helping that client die with the right assets. For example, if the client has a strong charitable intent they defined, and they have a tax-deferred account, $1 million they want to give to their alumni, the college they went to, and they have $1 million IRA, take a time out, like, don't do a Roth conversion on that, right? Just leave the institution as the primary beneficiary. And then if you have to do RMDs, make the gifts the RMDs during your lifetime. So really focus on the distributions so that they die with the right assets so their estate plan is very efficient. With missing the opportunities of transferring to charities in the heirs before death. And their plan for the charities is going to be much higher probability of success if they do that and build it out while they're alive than waiting to after death. Same thing for charity, giving the money to charity and have the charity invest it the way they want it invested and spend it the way they want it spent. Higher probability during their lifetime. And another thing that's missed, and I just catch kind of advisors working cases missing it, is that end-of-life expenses generally are tax deductible, right? A nursing home is a medical expense that under current laws deductible as a medical expense. So you can work with a plan, even though they have long-term care, you can work a plan so that at the end of life, you can end some of those deferrals and basically pick up that deferral income and not pay a tax. For my example, I did that for my mother. She had a bunch of deferred government bonds, and every month we would cash the bonds, book the interest income, and then take a medical deduction for that amount of money to end the deferral, rather than leaving it to the heirs.
So that leaves us to legacy, the last phase.
Oh, the favorite stage.
Yeah. Incidentally, how many of you noticed the little stars on the timeline at the bottom? A few of you? I just wanted to call that out because what we see with this overall framework is it's a wonderful opportunity to work with professionals in your network. That could be CPAs, that could be estate planning attorneys, geriatric care managers, concierge medicine specialists, whomever it might be. There's lots of collaboration opportunities. So when you're out there meeting with COIs, this is a great piece to use to really articulate everything that you do for a client, not only yourself, but what you help coordinate as well. So as we move into the legacy phase, a couple things that we wanted to touch on. One, leaving assets to the surviving spouse, how to do that in the right way versus what may be happening out there. How to fund that surviving spouse lifestyle with inherited assets in a tax-efficient way. And then Ernest will also touch on a double step-up in basis. Now, the first thing to note, estate planning output is available within MoneyGuide. So if you're not familiar with it, I certainly encourage you to take a look. This is just an example of a flow chart, very simple way of explaining how things might play out after first and second to die. Second, when you're thinking about lifestyle, there's an area called What Are You Afraid Of? So it's a great opportunity in your review meeting to talk a little bit about mortality and to talk a little bit about, hey, are you afraid of dying early or maybe living too long? And again, this is another opportunity to bring your client into the planning discussion and really drive ownership. Hand them the mouse and let them really figure out where their concerns are. So as we think about some of these opportunities, Ernest, you want to touch on step up in basis?
Yeah, so I think this phrase double step up in basis is just a term that Ben and I made up to be able to get it on the one-page chart. So don't Google it. I doubt if you get a hit on it. But it's all about losing the least amount of wealth to taxes. And before 2010, we had the state exemption was a use it or lose it. If one spouse died and didn't have assets and didn't use it, it'd be lost forever. And then 2010, we started portability. And so if you don't use it, you file a state tax return and shift it to your spouse. So the issue of the double step up in basis is that we want to put the client in the position that once the first spouse dies, that rather than funding that in the additional bypass trust or family trust, credit shelter trust, that we'd want to update their documents and leave those assets to the surviving spouse. So in a community property state at death, all the assets are stepped up above spouses, but non-community property only step up to the deceased spouse. So those assets should not go to that bypass trust, but go to the surviving spouse, either direct or in a marital trust. So what happens is that the surviving spouse has their assets, which are low bases, plus the inherited assets from their deceased spouse. Then generally the first thing that happens is we have a portfolio designed to fund the lifestyle for two that only has to fund the financial lifestyle of one. So we might want to take less equity risk and trim it down and put a higher allocation of fixed income. So we sell the step-up basis equities and put that in fixed income. So you get to basically trim the equities down without a tax. Then as long as that surviving spouse lives, when they need money out of equities to fund their lifestyle, we want to sell the step-up basis assets and hold their old portfolios that they had, okay? Then when that surviving spouse dies, all their assets get stepped up before it goes to the next generation. So the challenges, I think, are twofold. One is actually doing this for our clients, and secondly, communicating it to a prospect. You know, we're in a situation that when we pitch our value proposition to a prospect, we really forget a lot of value we bring because it's automated. This particular technique, once the assets go to the surviving spouse, we do it automatically because it ends up on a gain and loss report. And as we're trimming it down, we're trimming the highest basis asset, right, to produce lowest income. And because it's automated, we don't do a good job of telling a prospect this is what we do. So it's a big wow, so make sure you capture it.
Want to just talk a little bit about challenges in the field?
So, yeah, so in the field, the biggest challenges I see advisors are having is, it's amazing, but in 2010, not only did we go to portability, but we increased the exemption from $5 million per person plus CPI. And so because of that, most families saying, well, you know, we don't have $10 million of assets, so we're not worried about estate planning documents, and they left them on the shelf. Those families are the ones that need to update their documents. Because what happened is once the estate exemption moved up to $5 million, 10 for a couple, estate planning has shifted to income tax planning, right? You don't have an estate tax, but you really have an opportunity to minimize your loss of wealth in your family to income taxes. But you only can do it by updating your estate plan documents. So I always have prospects say, Ernest, say that again. I'm going to lower my taxes by updating my estate plan documents. Right. So anyway, I just explained in the previous slide how you do it. So they're not proactive. We've got to show leadership in that area. And it's all about amending the documents and avoiding the bypass trust. And then another thing that might help you getting the families to move forward and updating the documents is for them to think about, you know, the core of doing really updated documents is to protect their asset. They work their entire life to create the wealth they have, and having good updated documents, it's really about protecting their assets so those assets go to wherever they would like the legacy to look like.
So one of the things that Ernest is happy to talk to you all about tonight, maybe over dinner, over a glass of red wine, is the concept of decanting. How many of you are familiar with that concept? Yeah.
Can I tell you my story I told you?
What's that?
Can I share the story?
No, and we're going to save it for wine tonight. We're going to save it. He's got this great concept. So buy him a glass of red wine in particular, and he'll share with you some concepts around that potentially funded B trust. So let's talk a little bit about where we're taking this from here. Like Jonathan said, this is not just a marketing concept. We really want to build solutions and help you think about opportunities to make a difference in our clients' lives, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan to talk a little bit about some supporting services we're exploring.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'm going to hop into the second one here on the custodian cash options. So we've been, as Vince was talking about, we've been trying to make sure that you're not left alone with these, and then with these steps. And then the other thing is, as we have this path, it gets us thinking about, oh, you know, it'd be great if we could bring in some additional support services here and here along the way. So these are some slides. So here, we get a lot of questions about custodians that we're using and how to handle cash, right? Because a lot of the bank sweep options that are out there, they don't have an attractive interest rate, and so it's become harder for us to go and sweep into vehicles that might give us some better yield. But this example is, I think, one of many that might continue to come, where we're going to go through and put comparisons together of different service providers, different services that might be very beneficial to you. So quite simply, this is just a list of the 4 main custodians that we have available, and then kind of what their sweep options are, what their money market options are, which are purchased in many cases, and then if there's any special money market feature that we wanted to cover. But just walking through this, we can see that Schwab and TD, from an automatic sweep standpoint, they only offer bank sweeps. They both also, they also offer purchased money market funds. And so if you want to, you can get in for no cost a money market fund that has a better rate than what the sweeps are offering, and it's sometimes a substantially better rate. So those are both there. So at Schwab, you only have Schwab branded versions, and at TD, you only have third-party versions. On the Fidelity side, you still have the option on all their account types to sweep into a money market fund. It just might not be the default. So pay attention. I think the IRA applications, they default into a money market. The joint accounts don't, but it's a bubble right next to it. So just be aware as you're going through those to look for that. And then Fidelity has another interesting thing. If you use one of their Fidelity money market funds, and then you wanted to use, that's not a default, the sweep option, they have a concept called a secondary core. So you can go and you can purchase one of these Fidelity branded money market funds that might have a higher interest rate. Maybe you qualify just because you have a larger account size. And with that, you only have to do the initial purchase. You don't have to do the sale to actually go and use the money for a distribution or to go and trade some other place. So this is just an example of some of the grids that we're putting together to help you analyze these services. Another one that we're working on is on donor advised funds, since we think it's a nice planning concept to have available for you. And then here's a third one that we wanted to cover, and that's banking services. How many advisors are currently offering banking services to their clients? Can I just see some hands up there? Right, so not many. That's what we kind of thought. And so what we're actively looking at are high-yield savings account options that give us better rates than our typical, Main Street Bank is going to give us on our savings account, and a lot higher FDIC coverage levels, right? So there's some times where we're seeing coverage levels as much as $2 million available in a high-yield savings account. And so they're using multiple banks behind the scene, as you'd imagine, to get you that, maybe even a little higher. Online account opening, and it integrates electronically with existing banks. So that's one option. Another option we're seeing is this combination of both. There's still separate accounts, a savings account and a checking account. And so if you wanted to, you could offer full checking and saving services to your clients, right? So you can go and now potentially compete against the Goldmans or the Merrills because they're so integrated with their banking groups that here you'd be able to go and give high yield savings and debit cards, ATM networks, and bill pay services, all those integrated. So I want to just do a quick survey just so I can get some assessment here. How many people would be interested in offering high-yield savings accounts to their clients? Wonderful. How about high-yield savings and checking? Okay, right. Thank you for that feedback. Really appreciate it.
It's like a focus group in my olden days.
Yeah.
You know? The two-way mirror, you got M&Ms. So as we're exploring different solutions, one of the things that we've had some advisors use the Keebler tool. How many of you are familiar with the Keebler tool? We do a little bit of tax planning and kind of pro forma analysis. And in talking with Ernest and other folks internally, we thought, well, what if you could outsource that as well? It's kind of a bottom of the pyramid element, but what if you could just outsource that to a team member on the Loring Ward BAM side? So Ernest, you want to talk a little bit about this concept?
Yeah, so I prefer personally this tool, and the reason I like the tool is when you talk to the prospect or client about it, it's like you lift the hood and see the engine and they get it, how big the deferrals compound because it shows a tax projection for 15 years, and the different phrases we talked about just lift off the pages. So it's really easy to kind of talk them into ending some of the deferrals. The negative to it is it doesn't use Monte Carlo. It does compounding and tax deferred linear. We know returns anything but lineal. But it's free if you remember the AICPA PFP. I like it, but it's a little bit challenge if you're not previously a tax preparer and using it. So that's what I'm kind of exploring. Would it be somehow useful if that's something maybe we can pull together and find someone that would like to do it for our firms? But I think that pretty much covers it.
Yeah, show of hands, for those that aren't CPAs or don't necessarily want to get to this level of detail, how many of you might be interested in a for-fee or some type of service to help model the spend down concept? Just quick show of hands. Okay, fantastic, thank you. Well, as we wrap up, one of the things I wanted to just plant the seed, obviously we've done a lot of work on spend down, not only in terms of marketing and packaging and thinking about how it will integrate with MoneyGuide MoneyGuide Elite, as well as Design, Build, and Protect, but other elements that are coming down the pike. So the first is legislation. And without going into too much detail, there's a lot going on in Washington right now. And these are just some of the areas, Ernest, that you've called out.
Well, real quickly, under the Secure Act, it hit the news today. It passed the House back in May. It's stuck in the Senate. But the two big takeaways of the Secure Act is it no longer allows a stretch when the assets go to Generation 2. It forces the end of the deferral in an IRA account to 10 years. As I said earlier, you've got someone in a low bracket, probably in a low-cost state, leaving the asset to the next generation, the highest taxable income they're ever going to be, and now you've got to they force it out in 10 years. They're probably in a higher tax cost state. Secondly, it's going to change our definition of when this transition period ends and the distribution periods end because it pushes RMDs back from, say, 70.5 to 72. It may be an 18-month pushback. Number two is, we don't have these answers, but I think should be proactive and talk to your clients that these are things that are out there. We can't control them today, but it's great to talk about it. We don't have the answers, right? But be aware of it. We got national elections, right? We're in probably the lowest tax brackets we've had in a long time. We're running deficits. That is not going to be there forever. They're possibly going to go up. Sunsetting provisions. This is really tough, but people think for like estate tax purposes with this exemption now, that's $11,600 per person. No, that's not the law. The law is it's $11,600 for 7 more years, and it sunsets to the $5 million plus CPI since 2010. So you can be careful with all these complicated sunset provisions that you set the client to know, hey, it's going to revert back in 7 years. You get 7 years to do something. And the last thing I want to mention is we still continue to be in a low interest rate environment. So as you're working with the legacy goal with the clients being a low interest rate environment, that might help you do some advanced planning strategies for the family.
And the Design, Build, and Protect implementation strategy is a great piece to bring out and say we're continually reviewing all of these issues as it relates to Washington and focusing on those things that you can control, because they certainly can't control that. As we look forward as well, really enhancing the 360 Life Map and really hopefully providing a customized version so that you can help your clients focus on some of those things that Tobias talked about. And importantly, education. Just as the original version of Spend Down was designed as a training tool for advisors, we're going to be enhancing and rolling out a broader and enhanced collateral system around this concept of Design, Build, and Protect, around what you saw today in terms of Spend Down, advisor training and consumer-friendly materials, and ongoing support through MoneyGuide in terms of running those scenarios. So with that, as you're thinking about implementation strategy, I want you to think about how you might use this not only with those transitioning into retirement, but we're looking at other particular segments. There might be a version for dental professionals or entrepreneurs, women in transition, and divorcees. So these are all areas that we're exploring, and we're looking forward to that partnership with you to understand where we should focus and where we should prioritize. So with that, I want to thank my counterparts and leave you with a quote from Adam Yofan, who is here at the conference. If you find him, there's nothing in my 30 years of experience that has helped me in business development like Spend Down. So thank you again. Enjoy the conference, and we'll see you outside.